When I read all the research about you, one of the most touching, poignant, saddest things for me was that after you lost your father,
Yes.
that you had to go. You settled with Yoko on the estate. You got X amount of money,
Yeah,
but you had to buy the postcards that you'd written to your father, and your father wrote to you at auction. I went,
yeah, I know.
That's disgusting.
I know. Well, it's not only that.
Sad.
It's a lot of his belongings that were auctioned off by Yoko, and a lot of his, you know, whether they were personal possessions or whether they were instruments, you know. And I mean, the most ironic thing is with the settlement that I did receive.
People have been imagining fame, success, wealth, and musical talent that very few people could ever hope to match when they hear the name Julian Lennon. This has been the case for many years. When it comes to his glamorous and seemingly happy side, are you aware of the much darker side of his personality? A shining image of the radiant star is reflected in Julian's performances, which are vivacious and full of positive energy whenever he takes the stage. On the other hand, his childhood could not have been even remotely as happy as many people might imagine it to be. In point of fact, one could say that Julian's childhood was quite traumatic, and a significant portion of the reason for this sentiment is that he had a terrible relationship with his absent father. To be more specific, what took place? Stay tuned as we uncover this story of love, loss, and tragedy, and if you are wondering the same things that we are, then you should stay tuned. One of the most influential musicians in history, John Lennon, is Julian's father. He has left an indelible mark not only on popular culture but also on the entire music industry. During his time with Paul McCartney, he was a member of one of the most legendary songwriting duos in the history of the world. Additionally, Lennon was a notable member of the band The Beatles, which is widely recognized as a musical group. To put it another way, John Lennon was just as well liked by his fellow band members as he was by his devoted fan base. He was an incredible singer who captivated the hearts of his audience. However, when it came to the subject of being a father, his son did not have a lot of positive things to say from his perspective. Yes, the incredible singer that we all looked up to was not nearly as remarkable when it came to being a father. In spite of the fact that it might appear harsh at first, this is what his son has admitted to the general public. How did this come to be? Let's go through their story and figure out how it happened. His beginnings. John Winston Lennon was born in Liverpool on October 9, 1940. He was the only child of Julia and Alfred Lennon. John Winston Lennon was the only child of the Lennon family. During the time that his son was being born, Alfred, who was of Irish descent and worked as a merchant seaman, was absent. After his grandfather on his father's side, John Jack Lennon, and after Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, his parents gave him the name John Winston Lennon. The fact that his father was frequently away from home did not prevent him from sending regular paychecks to his family at Newcastle Road, Liverpool, where Lennon and his mother resided. When he failed to show up for work without permission in February of 1944, the check was stopped. After staying away for a period of 6 months, he eventually returned home and made an offer to take care of the family. However, Julia, who was already expecting the child of her new partner at the time, did not agree with the idea. During the remaining years of his childhood and adolescence, John Lennon resided at Mendips, which is located on Menlove Avenue in Woolton. He shared his home with Mimi, his mother's sister, who was granted custody of him, and her husband, George Toogood Smith, who did not have any children of their own. Julia made frequent trips to Mendips, and John frequently paid her a visit at Blomfield Road in Liverpool. During these visits, she taught John how to play the banjo, played records of Elvis Presley, and demonstrated how to play the song Ain't That a Shame by Fats Domino. In September of 1980, John Lennon made a remark about his family and his rebellious nature. He said, "A part of me would like to be accepted by all aspects of society and not be this loud-mouthed lunatic poet-musician. On the other hand, I cannot be someone that I am not. All of the other boys' parents, including Paul's father, would tell me to stay away from him. I was the one who was the target of their advice. The parents had an innate understanding that I was a troublemaker, which meant that I did not conform to their expectations and that I would have an impact on their children, which I did. Although I was partially envious of the fact that I did not have this so-called home, I did my best to cause a disturbance in the homes of all of my friends. There were 5 women who were members of my family. They were 5 sisters who were 5 strong, intelligent, and beautiful women. It just so happened that one of them was my mother. She was simply incapable of coping with life. Because she was the youngest, she had a husband who ran away to sea. The war was going on, and she was unable to deal with me. I ended up living with her older sister. She was the youngest of 7 children. Those women were nothing short of amazing. For me, that was the beginning of my feminist education. Infiltrating the minds of the other boys would be my plan. Because I do not live with my parents, I am able to say that they are not gods. This is because I am aware of this fact. Finished was he. Dovedale Primary School was where Lennon received his early education and was raised as an Anglican. He was described by Harvey at the time as a happy-go-lucky, good-humored, easygoing, and lively young man. He began attending Quarry Bank High School in Liverpool in September 1952. Immediately following his successful completion of the 11+ examination. He remained there for a total of 5 years. On the other hand, he was notorious for frequently getting into fights, being a bully, and disrupting classes. In spite of this, he quickly established himself as the class clown and even drew humorous cartoons that were published in the Daily Howl, the school magazine that he had created through his own initiative. It was in the year 1956 that John's biological mother, Julia, purchased his very first guitar. She lent her son £5 and 10 shillings for the instrument, which was a low-cost Galatone Champion acoustic guitar. However, she stipulated that the guitar be delivered to her own residence rather than Mimi's. She did this because she was aware that her sister did not encourage her son's musical endeavors. She frequently told him, "The guitar is all very well, John, but you'll never make a living out of it." Mimi was skeptical of his assertion that he would become famous one day, and she encouraged him to become disinterested in music. She hoped that he would eventually become bored with music. The years that Lennon spent in senior high school were characterized by a change in his behavior. When he was in high school, his teachers would frequently describe him by saying that he has an excessive number of misguided ambitions, that his energy is frequently misdirected, and that his work consistently lacks effort. Instead of making use of his abilities, he is content to continue drifting. It was ultimately due to this behavior that a rift developed in the relationship that he shared with his aunt. Although Lennon did not succeed in his O-level examinations, he was granted admission to the Liverpool College of Art as a result of the intervention of both his aunt and the headmaster. During his time at the college, he started dressing in teddy boy clothes, and as a result of his behavior, he was threatened with expulsion. According to Cynthia Powell, a fellow student of John Lennon's who would later become his future wife, he was expelled from the college before the end of his final year. However, who would have thought that his dreams were indeed only a matter of time? Almost immediately, John took control of his own destiny and established a legendary band, which marked the beginning of a legacy. At the age of 15, John Lennon established a skiffle band known as the Quarrymen. During the month of September in 1956, John Lennon established the band, which was given the name Quarry Bank High School. By the summer of 1957, the Quarrymen had already performed a lively set of songs that were a combination of rock and roll and skiffle. At the Quarrymen's second performance, which followed Lennon's request for McCartney to become a member of the band, John Lennon had his first encounter with Paul McCartney. In a previous interview, McCartney disclosed that his Aunt Mimi was well aware of the fact that John's friends were of a lower social class and would frequently belittle him whenever he came to visit John Lennon. Mike McCartney, McCartney's brother, claims that their father had a similar disapproval of John Lennon, stating that Lennon would get his son into trouble. Despite this, McCartney's father gave permission for the band to practice in the front room of the family home. It was during this time that John Lennon wrote his first song, "Hello, Little Girl," which went on to become a top 10 hit in the United Kingdom in 1963. In order to fill the vacant lead guitarist position, McCartney suggested that his friend George Harrison be considered. However, John Lennon believed that Harrison, who was only 14 years old at the time, was too young for the position. The audition took place on the upper deck of a bus in Liverpool, and it was McCartney who orchestrated it. Harrison performed a raunchy song for John Lennon, who then asked him to join the band. Stuart Sutcliffe, a previous friend of John Lennon's from art school, eventually joined the band as a bassist. The four individuals came together to form the band known as the Beatles. However, because they were still looking for a drummer, they approached Pete Best with the idea of inviting him to join them for the 48-night residency that they were going to perform in Hamburg, West Germany, in August of that year. Brian Epstein was hired as the manager of the Beatles in 1962. Although he had no prior experience managing artists, he exerted a significant amount of influence over the group's behavior on stage and the manner in which they dressed. After Sutcliffe made the decision to remain in Hamburg, McCartney took over as the bassist, and Best was replaced by Ringo Starr as the drummer following his departure. With this, the band's lineup was complete, consisting of 4 members, which would continue until the band's dissolution in 1970. The first single released by the band was titled "Love Me Do," and it was released in October of 1962. It climbed all the way up to number 17 on the British charts. On February 11, 1963, they recorded their debut album, titled "Please Please Me," in a record time of less than 10 hours. This occurrence occurred on a day when John Lennon was suffering from a cold, as evidenced by the vocal performance of the final song that was recorded on that day, which was titled "Twist and Shout." It was the collaboration between Lennon and McCartney that resulted in the release of 8 of the album's 14 tracks. With a few notable exceptions, one of which was the title of the album itself. John Lennon had not yet employed his passion for wordplay in the lyrics of his songs. He stated, "We were just writing songs, pop songs with no more thought of them than that, to create a sound, and the words were almost irrelevant." During an interview in 1987, Paul McCartney stated that the other members of the Beatles looked up to John Lennon and that they considered him to be their own personal Elvis. The entire group looked up to John. Because of his advanced age, he was considered to be the leader. He had the sharpest mind and the quickest wit imaginable. It was during the tour that John Lennon was on when his first son Julian was born in April of 1963. Julian was born 3 days after Lennon met him. The Beatles achieved mainstream success in the United Kingdom during this phase of their tour. Lennon made fun of the audience while they were performing at the Royal Variety Show, which was attended by the Queen Mother and other members of the British royal family. I'd like to make a request for your assistance with our upcoming song. For those of you who are sitting in the more affordable seats, please clap your hands, and for the rest of you, do not hesitate to shake your jewelry. After a year of incredible success, which earned them the title of Beatlemania in the United Kingdom, the band made their historic debut in the United States on The Ed Sullivan Show in February of 1964. This performance marked the beginning of their rise to prominence on the international stage. Following this, there was a period of 2 years during which John Lennon was constantly touring, making films, and writing songs. During this time, he also wrote 2 books, In His Own Right and A Spaniard in the Works. When the Beatles were honored with the title of Members of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, in the Queen's birthday honors in 1965, they were given recognition from the British establishment. During the month of March of that year, he and Harrison were unknowingly introduced to LSD by a dentist who was hosting a dinner party for the 2 musicians and their spouses. The dentist added substance to the coffee that was distributed to the guests at the party. As soon as they expressed a desire to leave, their host disclosed the substances that they had consumed and strongly recommended that they remain inside the house due to the potential consequences that would follow. All of them thought it was on fire later on when they were in a lift at a nightclub. This is an example of how a warning is well said. During an interview that took place in March 1996 with Maureen Cleave, a reporter for the Evening Standard, John Lennon made the following statement: "Christianity will perish, it will disappear, and it will shrink." At this point, we are more well-known than Jesus. What will come first, rock and roll or Christianity? I have no idea which one will dominate. It was 5 months later when a magazine in the United States quoted the comment, and it caused a great deal of offense in the United States, despite the fact that it was largely ignored in England. Following the consequences of those words, which included the destruction of records by the Beatles, activities by the Ku Klux Klan, and threats against John Lennon, the band ultimately decided to disband and stop touring as a result of these events. The group eventually disbanded, despite the fact that they continued to interact with one another. The question is, however, what became of these wonderful friendships after the separation, long after the band had disbanded? During the years that followed the Beatles' eventual dissolution in 1970, John Lennon maintained a cordial relationship with Ringo Starr. However, his relationships with Paul McCartney and George Harrison were more complicated. In the beginning, he was close to Harrison. But after John Lennon moved to the United States in 1971, the two of them began to drift apart. When Harrison was in New York for his December Dark Horse tour in 1974, Lennon agreed to join him on stage. However, after an argument regarding Lennon's refusal to sign an agreement that would finally dissolve the Beatles' legal partnership, Lennon ultimately decided not to join Harrison on stage. When Harrison visited John Lennon during his 5 years away from the music industry, he later stated that he had the impression that Lennon was attempting to communicate with him, but that his relationship with Ono prevented him from doing so. Additionally, Harrison caused Lennon to feel offended in 1980 when he published his autobiography titled I, Me, Mine. In an interview with Playboy, John Lennon revealed that he had the deepest feelings for Paul McCartney. Not only did he come at him with the lyrics of his song, How Do You Sleep? But he also attacked him. After the band broke up, Lennon continued to argue with him through the media for a full 3 years after the breakup. After some time had passed, the two individuals started to re-establish some aspects of the close friendship that they had previously shared. In 1974, they even played music together once more before eventually drifting apart once more. Lennon stated that they watched the episode of Saturday Night Live in which Lorne Michaels made a $3,000 offer to get the Beatles to reunite on the show during McCartney's final visit in April of 1976. McCartney's visit was the last time to visit the Beatles. According to Lennon, the two individuals had even contemplated going to the studio in order to make a joke appearance and attempt to claim their portion of the money. However, they were simply too exhausted to consider doing so. An interview that took place 3 days before McCartney's passing provided Lennon with a summary of his feelings toward McCartney. Throughout the course of my career, I have only chosen to collaborate with two individuals, namely Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono. That is really not a bad choice. Lennon always felt a musical competitiveness with McCartney, and he continually listened to his music. This was in addition to the fact that he had become estranged from McCartney. According to Fred Seaman, who was Lennon and Ono's assistant at the time, John Lennon was content to kick back and relax during his career break from 1975 until shortly before his death. This was the case as long as Paul McCartney continued to produce material that Lennon considered to be of a low quality. It was in 1980, the year that Lennon returned to the studio, that McCartney released Coming Up. This was the year that Lennon became aware of the situation. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to get the tune out of his head. He jokingly complained that it was driving him crazy. When asked in the same year whether the group was feared adversaries or the closest of friends, John Lennon responded that they were neither, and that he had not seen any of them in a very long time. He also stated that he had not seen any of them in so long. In addition to that, he stated, "I still love those guys." Although the Beatles have disbanded, John, Paul, George, and Ringo continue to perform. There is one relationship that John continues to mess up, and that is the truth about the relationship that he has with Julius Lennon. This is true despite the fact that John has unique relationships with his former bandmates. Even though the couple isn't very open about their relationship, we have a few interviews in which Julian opens up about his struggles and discusses with the world the parts of his childhood that were less than happy. In a conversation that took place when Julius was 48 years old, he disclosed that he was contemplating whether he should get married or have children. He elaborated on the source of his thoughts, which he identified as his father. The explanation that he provided was that John Lennon was a young man who had no idea what he was doing when he made the decision to have children. This was a mistake that Julian did not want to let happen again. In order to prepare himself for taking on such a significant responsibility, he desired to first discover the essence of who he was. The mere fact that they made this confession reveals a great deal about the relationship that they shared with one another. Now, statements of this audacity would cause anyone to wonder what exactly occurred to cause John's son to hate him in such a manner, and they would also convince Julian not to try his hand at being a father simply because he was afraid that he would be like his father. First, let's take a look at the dynamic within their family so that we can get a better understanding. When John Lennon and Cynthia Powell were both attending Liverpool College of Art in 1957, they became friends. This was the beginning of the Lennon family dynamic. Even though she was studying graphics, Cynthia also took classes in lettering, just like John Lennon once did. As a result of the fact that he never brought any drawing supplies with him, Lennon was constantly borrowing pens and pencils from Powell. Powell eventually found out that the only reason he was there was because previous instructors had refused to instruct him. An air of respectability surrounded Powell, and she moved in different social circles than the man who would eventually become her husband. Powell eventually dyed her hair blonde after learning that John Lennon was obsessed with the French actress Brigitte Bardot. Initially, Powell was concerned about Lennon's appearance and attitude, but she eventually turned her hair blonde. The couple started dating in the fall of 1958, but from the very beginning, this relationship was not devoid of any difficulties. Jealousy was a natural trait for John Lennon, and his obsessiveness frequently manifested itself in violent behavior. Powell recalled in her memoir titled John, which was published in 2005, that he had once struck her after seeing her dance with Stuart Sutcliffe. As a result, the two of them broke up for a period of 3 months before John apologized, and they were able to recover their relationship. Cynthia admitted in her memoir that although he never again physically abused her, he could still be cruel to her verbally. She said that he was never physically abusive to her again. After some time had passed, John Lennon stated that he had never questioned his attitude towards women prior to meeting Yoko Ono. He stated that the song Getting Better by the Beatles told the story of his or his peers' own struggles. Back in the day, I was a cruel person to my woman and to any woman in general. I used to be a hitter. I was unable to articulate my thoughts, so I hit it off. In my fights with men, I also hit women. This is the reason why I can't stop talking about peace. The couple eventually tied the knot on August 23, 1962, after John found out that Cynthia was expecting a child. However, their marriage was kept a secret because their manager, Brian Epstein, was concerned that a married Beatle would cause the fans to feel dissatisfied. The beginning of his marriage coincided with the beginning of Beatlemania in the United Kingdom. The evening of his wedding day was the first time he ever performed, and from that point on, he would continue to do so almost every day. Cynthia believed that the beginning of the dissolution of their marriage was caused by John Lennon's use of LSD, which she admitted caused her to have the impression that John was no longer interested in her. During the year 1967, when the group was traveling by train to Bangor, Wales, for the Transcendental Meditation Seminar that was being taught by Maharishi Yogi, a police officer did not recognize her and prevented her from boarding the train. As time went on, she reflected on how the event appeared to be a metaphor for the dissolution of their marriage. 1963 was the year that Julian was brought into the world. John had just turned 23 years old when he was born, and Cynthia had just turned 24. Nevertheless, by the time the 1960s came to a close, John had already married another woman named Yoko Ono, with whom he would eventually go on to marry and start a family. He then abandoned Julian and Cynthia, leaving them to fend for themselves completely. One of the women that Lennon initially explained to Cynthia as someone who was only trying to obtain money for her avant-garde S***T after he had taken a bite out of the apple that was displayed in her artwork apple, much to Cynthia's ire. Additionally, Julian's birth, along with his mother Cynthia's marriage to John Lennon, was concealed from the public because Epstein was of the opinion that the public's awareness of such matters would pose a threat to the commercial success of the Beatles. Approximately 4 years later, Julian recalled that when I was a young child living in Weybridge, I was brought home from school by a trundle, and I came walking up with one of my watercolor paintings. All that was there was a group of celebrities and a blonde girl that I had known from school, and my father asked, "What is this?" Earlier, I mentioned that it is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Despite the fact that it was later reported to have been derived from the initials LSD, John Lennon insisted that it was not the case. Lennon used it as the title of a song that was performed by the Beatles. Julian believed that he was more connected to McCartney than he was to his father, and Lennon was distant from him. The departure of Julian's father had a profound impact on him as a young child, when he was completely oblivious to the world around him, and he has not concealed this fact from the general public. Julian has been very forthcoming about the intense feelings that he experienced as a child as a result of the fact that he felt as if his father had vanished from the face of the earth when he had left. He has even disclosed that it appeared as if his father had vanished from the face of the earth. Further commenting on the public love affair that took place between his father John and his father's second wife, Yoko Ono, he mentioned that it made him feel as if he and his mother had been separated from the rest of the family. After checking in on Julian Lennon and his mother Cynthia during a challenging time, Paul McCartney came up with the song "Hey Jude" to express his affection for them. While it was initially known as "Hey Jules," it was subsequently renamed. At first, John Lennon was under the impression that the song was about him and Yoko, but Paul McCartney made it clear that the song was intended for Julian. There was very little interaction between Julian and his father, and it took Cynthia more than a decade to make an effort to try to repair their relationship. It was John's admission that he loved both of his sons equally, despite the fact that Sean, his second son, was planned, and Julian was an unplanned child. Julian, on the other hand, voiced his dissatisfaction with his father's lack of love and attention, referring to him as a hypocrite for preaching about peace but not putting it into practice in his own life. Julian did not harbor any resentment towards his half-brother Sean, and he continued to show respect for Yoko Ono, despite the fact that their relationship was fraught with difficulties. The majority of John's artistic abilities were passed down to him, but he did not inherit his father's love and kindness. In spite of the fact that Julian later asserted that he had forgiven his father, he admitted that it was challenging for him to reconcile his feelings, particularly after John's tragic death in 1980. John had a difficult time controlling his substance abuse, and the dissolution of the Beatles had a profound impact on him. In December of 1980, he was killed by Mark David Chapman, which brought an abrupt end to his journey through life. John had expressed a desire to get back in touch with Julian before he passed away, despite the fact that their relationship was often tense. Julian reflected with fondness on the times he had spent with his father during his childhood, recalling the happiness he experienced prior to the deterioration of their relationship. Are you of the opinion that the relationship between Julian and John could have been repaired if John had not passed away at such a young age? Or was it possible that they had made the necessary repairs prior to the accident? Please let us know in the comments section below and subscribe to receive additional content that is worth watching.